Cleveland Browns upsetting the Pittsburgh Steelers this past weekend was one of the most astounding events I have ever seen in the NFL. Both the current and historical circumstances made this upset shocking, and understanding all of that context makes the result almost unbelievable. There was drama during the game, before the game, during the week, throughout the season, and all of it was incredible to watch. I want to talk about every part, but let's first get into the backstory of why this game meant so much to the Browns. Heading into the season, they'd been struggling through one of the worst stretches in NFL history. They hadn't won a playoff game since 1994 and had lost every single game in Pittsburgh for the last 17 years. These two teams have played twice a season since 1950, but since that last Browns playoff win, they were 7-40-1 against the Steelers before 2020 started. Cleveland and Pittsburgh share a fierce rivalry, but their franchises could not be more different. The Steelers' 6 Super Bowl wins are tied for the most ever, while the Browns have been to the playoffs just twice in the last 31 seasons. The Steelers are an old veteran team with a legendary coach and quarterback, while the Browns have the 4th youngest roster, a third-year quarterback, and a rookie head coach. They've been flat awful for as long as I can remember, but in 2018 when they drafted Baker Mayfield, their young nucleus slowly began cooking into a potential playoff contender heading into this year. They jumped out to an exhilarating 4-1 start, but when they traveled to Pittsburgh in Week 6, their playoff hopes and dreams were quickly shot back down to earth when the Steelers smoked them 38-7. But this Browns team is made of something different. They finished 11-5, beating the Steelers, who were resting their starters in Week 17, to advance to the wildcard and their first postseason berth since 2002. Their opponent? Well, you know. The Steelers were the best team in the NFL through 12 weeks, but had slowly cooled off and showed some serious flaws. However, they still won the division, were 12-4, and were still the Steelers. As if the Browns going to Pittsburgh wasn't daunting enough, their coach Kevin Stefanski got COVID, as did their starting guard Joel Bitonio and starting corner Denzel Ward, as well as several others. And due to the outbreak, the team couldn't even practice together until the Friday before the game. In the most important Browns matchup in decades, Stefanski would be sitting in his basement pounding Bud Lights. But they still won 48-37. So how did the Browns overcome some of the most dire circumstances ever and do the impossible? The interesting thing about both teams' offensive game plans was how similar they actually were. They both relied heavily on the quick passing game, but for very different reasons. The Steelers used the quick game because that's what they've been doing all season, and the Browns' defensive game plan to counter it was smart. Their linemen got in the throwing lanes and put their hands up to disrupt Ben's timing. They know he is in the pocket the shortest amount of time in the league and gets rid of the ball quicker than anybody. He's been the least pressured QB because of how quick he gets rid of the ball, and since the Browns have one of the lowest blitz rates anyway, they hardly blitzed. They knew they wouldn't really get pressure, but constantly threw off Ben's timing and vision by getting their hands in his face. Ben had the most batted passes in the entire NFL. If you know the quarterback is throwing quickly and not going to push the ball down the field, the defensive line can get their hands up into the windows of his low trajectory throws. Despite Ben's 4 interceptions, he actually read the field pretty well throughout the game, but his arm couldn't cash the checks that his brain was writing. Here's an example of the Browns' game plan working to perfection. It's 3rd and 1 with the Steelers losing 28-0 and the offense spread out in an empty formation. They're running a 3-man stick concept to the right, and the Browns are showing a 6-man blitz look up front. Ben knows that the Browns' coverage isn't really sound. Whether it's man or zone, they have defensive backs matched on the 1 and 2 receivers, but one of those 3 will have to sprint outside of the snap to cover the tight end Vance McDonald. Since it's most likely going to be linebacker Jacob Phillips, the stick route is the perfect call to pick up the necessary yard, and Ben knows it. But thanks to the Browns' emphasis on quickly getting their hands up, the D lineman picks off the pass. Another facet of the Browns' defensive game plan was to play predominantly 2 high coverages. In cover 2 zone, for example, that brings a 5th defender underneath to clog up passing lanes while positioning an additional safety deep to take away any chance Chase Claypool or Deontay Johnson has of getting open deep. Usually, the offense will turn to a run-heavy approach when they see the 2 deep safeties, since the defense is out-gapped, meaning they don't have enough defenders to occupy every gap in the run game, so the Browns were essentially daring the Steelers to run the ball. They knew that Pittsburgh has one of the worst run games in the league. When looking at Football Outsiders' adjusted line yards, their offensive line was third worst of anybody in the last 3 seasons. And against light boxes like this one, which is 7 defenders or less, they were 27th in yards per carry. They're running mid-zone with split zone action and jet motion. A critical coaching point to the zone run game is for the running back to be incredibly decisive when he makes his cut. It is a one-cut system, so if the back is dancing or is at all indecisive, the scheme just isn't going to work. When James Conner sees the 3 technique take on the play side guard, his process takes him to the backside A-gap. As soon as he sees this, he has to make his cut and go now. But by hesitating and not getting downfield, the 3-tech who was taken care of sheds his block. And if Conner had made the cut on time, the center would have climbed to the backer and Claypool would have taken care of the safety, forming a seam through the second level. Conner ended the game with just 37 yards on 11 carries. Because the Steelers couldn't punish the Browns' light boxes, they stayed in 2 deep looks for most of the game, restricting the space Ben could attack. On another one of his 4 interceptions, the Browns sat back and played Tampa 2 zone, which is like their 5 underneath cover 2, but takes one of the hook defenders and drops him to the open middle of the field. The Steelers are running Dusty Dig, which is double unders with a corner route up top and a dig glance type route from the flanker at the bottom. The dropping linebacker in Tampa 2 almost always turns to the strong side of the formation, so Ben, like all good QBs, knows the best way to attack this coverage is the backside dig. 2 deep safety looks allow the corners to bump the receivers of the line since they have help over the top. So though Ben gets to his correct read, the timing between him and his receiver is just a little bit off. As we mentioned before, Ben did a good job throughout the game of correctly reading the coverage, but it was those little technical parts of the Browns' game plan that ultimately did him in. He immediately looks at the safety and sees he's dropping into a deep half. Okay, we know it's too high. Then he sees the Tampa dropper getting depth, which he wouldn't in other coverages. So now we know we want the dig route breaking into that space. But watch Myles Garrett. He begins to rush, then stops, and moves right into the throwing lane. Between the dig route getting bumped at the line since they weren't too high, and Garrett jumping up, Ben is thrown off just the tiniest bit. The velocity is a little too quick, the placement a little too high, and the ball gets tipped and picked for yet another Steelers turnover. Yes, the Browns' offense was gifted 5 of those turnovers, and excellent field position from their defense. But Baker Mayfield and the offense still had to execute at a high level to beat one of the best units in football. They still had a score to settle from back in Week 6, when Baker threw for just 119 yards, 2 interceptions, and was knocked out of the game with an injury. The Browns' game plan took stock of the Steelers' ferocious blitz-heavy attack, which led the league in pressures and was second in blitz rate, so they constantly dialed up quick concepts of their own. They ended up targeting Steelers linebackers Robert Spillane and Vince Williams the most of anybody on their defense, and repeatedly attacked the middle of the field with Austin Hooper and Jarvis Landry. To get those inside matchups on the linebackers, they needed to get the Steelers into zone coverage, which is why this play early in the first quarter, with the score just 7-0, was the most critical in the game. The Steelers are showing some pretty obvious man coverage tells before the snap, and when Jarvis Landry motions across and cornerback Mike Hilton follows, it's almost a guarantee they're in man with a single deep safety. The Browns are running a concept we've broken down before called arches, which is a shallow cross with a quick post route coming in behind it. The defense's attention is usually drawn to the shallow, which opens the post in the next window over, so Baker has to properly read whether or not the safety Minkah Fitzpatrick is blitzing or dropping back into a robber or rat type coverage. The Steelers were expecting Baker to struggle with Minkah rotating after the snap like he did in Week 6. Early in this game, the Browns ran their double slant lion arrow concept, which due to any surprise low hole zone defenders should be thrown to the second slant rather than the first. When Baker sees the corner carry the arrow, he never feels Minkah coming down to rob the first slant, and he easily intercepts the pass and takes it back to the house. He rotated after the snap like that a couple times throughout the Week 6 matchup, and Baker struggled with the look. So the Steelers figured they could fool him the next time around, but Baker was ready. Here's Minkah positioned over the center, showing like he's going to blitz. But Baker knows he isn't, since the advanced scouting report shows Minkah's only rushed the QB 3 times all year. So at the snap, when Minkah hangs in that first window, Baker immediately progresses to the quick post and just barely fits it in. Landry takes it the rest of the way, and the Browns jump out to a 14-0 lead. That early dagger forced the Steelers to play a lot more zone coverage, which allowed Baker to target Landry and Hooper in unfair matchups against those aforementioned linebackers. Basement Stefanski trusted Baker to play in empty formations, which was smart because it spread out the Steelers' zone coverages and allowed Baker to quickly pick apart their defense to negate the inevitable pressure. The Steelers blitzed him 20 times, but he was just pressured twice. And of course, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt were critical components of the Browns' offense, but the trust in Baker to take control of this game was critical. In a matchup that had the Browns as 10-point underdogs heading in, Cleveland shocked everybody and crushed Pittsburgh, winning there for the first time in forever. The Browns had everything possible working against them, so it was only fitting that this would be their first playoff win in decades. Because they understood what their opponent was trying to do and attacked their weaknesses on both sides of the ball, they won one of the most epic games that we will always remember. They had history going against them. They had circumstances more than going against them. But they had a game plan that was legit, and they believed that they would win. Despite all of the adversity they faced, the Browns proved that beating the Steelers was destiny. They're a young team that slowly improved throughout the season, and now that they get Stefanski back in action, and their team looks to be freed from COVID hell, with rewritten history in the rearview mirror, we're on to Kansas City.